Hello, this is Sarah Kay, and welcome to this Croner-i eCPD module. This module will cover the conditions which must be fulfilled in order to zero rate the supply of exported goods. The export of goods from the EU, and this module is only concerned with exports to non-EU destinations, fall into two categories. Direct exports, where the shipment of the goods is under the control of the supplier, and indirect exports, where the shipment is under the control of someone else, usually the customer. As we will see, although the conditions for zero rating direct and indirect exports are largely the same, there are particular issues that indirect exporters must be aware of. There are three main conditions which must be fulfilled in order for zero rating to apply. First, time limits. Goods must be exported within 3 months of the time of supply. Second, proof of export. The exporter must have evidence for shipment. And lastly, for indirect exports, the customer must be an overseas person. We will look at these three criteria in more detail in the next slides. As I said, for both direct and indirect exports, the goods must be physically exported within 3 months of the time of supply. This is within 3 months of the earlier of the date the goods are sent to or removed by the customer and the date full payment is received. So, if goods are fully paid for but not delivered to the customer for 6 months, the sale cannot be treated as an export and, in most cases, the sale will be standard rated. Deposits and payments on account received in advance of shipment can be zero rated if there is an intention to export the goods in future. Exporters must hold documentary evidence of export. There is no one document that exporters must hold. They will have a basket of documents which, taken together, demonstrate first that a transaction has taken place, and second, that the goods have physically left the EU. The proof obtained will depend upon how the goods are shipped, and HMRC have published specific requirements for each form of transport. Although the evidence threshold is high, it is important to remember that the vast majority of the paperwork needed to evidence an export is automatically generated in the normal course of business. There are three categories of export evidence. Official evidence, which is generated by HMRC when the export is declared. Commercial evidence, which describes the physical removal of the goods. And supplementary evidence, which is contained in the business's normal records. Official and commercial evidence have equal weight. Although many exporters will hold both, only one of these must be held to meet HMRC's requirements. In all cases, the business must have supplementary evidence of the transaction. Taken together, all the evidence must confirm the supplier, the consignor, the customer, the goods, their value, their destination, and how they were shipped. It is vital that the goods are described as accurately as possible, using specific descriptions, and that they are valued accurately. If the evidence is deficient in any particular, the conditions for zero rating will not be met, and most goods will be standard rated in this case. Indirect exporters must take particular care because their shipments are not under their control and they must rely on their customers to provide official and commercial evidence of export. To protect themselves, many suppliers obtain a deposit equal to the VAT due on the goods before releasing them. This is then refunded to the customer when they have sent satisfactory official or commercial evidence back to the supplier. Although goods can be delivered to a UK location, such as a freight company premises where they are packed with other goods to be exported, they must not otherwise be delivered to a UK address or used in the UK before export. Finally, in this section, an indirect export can only be zero rated if it is supplied to an overseas person, i.e. someone not resident in the UK and who has no UK business establishment from which supplies are made. Indirect exports can be supplied to overseas persons who are UK VAT registered, provided that they are not established here. Exporters supplying indirect exports must take care if their customers are registered in the UK as they must evidence the lack of establishment. Lastly, overseas persons also includes overseas authorities such as foreign governments. On the next 4 slides, we will look at 4 examples where the rules for zero rating are tweaked or special care is needed. First, goods sold for processing or incorporation prior to export. Sometimes, customers ask that goods are delivered to a third person so that they can be processed or incorporated into other goods before export. In this case, the 3-month time limit for the export of the goods is extended to 6 months. The exporter must confirm that the goods are only delivered to, not supplied to, the third party, and that no use is made of them other than the processing or incorporation before export. There is a similar relaxation of the time limits for the export of racehorses. Racehorses are goods for VAT purposes, and their sale is subject to the normal rules. When sold for export, racehorses may not be delivered direct to their new owner. They may remain in the UK for breaking, conditioning, training or covering. In this case, like goods sold for processing or incorporation, the time limit for exports is extended to 6 months. In addition, on request by the vendor, the time limit can also be extended to 12 months. Like any exported item, the horse cannot be used in the UK before export, which, in this case, means that it cannot be raced. Like any other good, motor vehicles can be zero rated when sold for export. However, because of the scope for them to be used in the UK before export, suppliers must take particular care. Suppliers making a direct export must ensure that the vehicle is not used or delivered in the EC before export. Motor vehicles can be collected by the customer, but when sold for indirect export, they must not be used except for the direct trip to their place of departure from the UK. There is also a personal export scheme which covers sales to some overseas individuals. We do not have time to consider it here, but guidance is available in Notice 707. Finally, in this section, the export of aid by a charity to a non-EU destination can be zero rated as an export. This means that charities can register for VAT and recover VAT incurred on the purchase of items delivered as aid. HMRC has not published specific evidence requirements for charities, but they should ensure that they have commercial, official and supplementary evidence to support their claims for input tax. We end this eCPD with consideration of retail exports. We do not have time to cover them in detail, but you should be aware that there are 3 scenarios in which retail sales can be zero rated as exports. First, there is the personal export scheme for motor vehicles that we referred to earlier. This scheme has strict eligibility and evidence requirements, and these are set out in Notice 707. Second, VAT registered retailers can use the retail export scheme described in Notice 704 to zero rate sales to overseas visitors. And finally, approved duty-free shops may zero rate their sales to intending passengers. The key things to remember from this module are that most exports are direct or indirect, and there are strict time limits for export and strict evidence requirements which must be met. In many cases, there are particular rules which must be considered. In this module, we looked at goods sold for processing and incorporation, racehorses, motor vehicles, and overseas aid. However, this is not an exhaustive list. Finally, there are schemes which permit retail sales to overseas visitors and travellers, all of which have specific requirements which should be confirmed before a sale is zero rated. I trust you have found this module on exports informative. Please exit this activity and click Launch Quiz to complete the quiz. Once you have completed the quiz, you will be able to print out your personal certificate. The module homepage also contains a link to the notes that accompany this module and further resources available to you from Croner-i, including our in-depth and quick overview commentary. Goodbye. and thank you for using Croner-i eCPD.
For further information and to view the full range of Croner-i eCPD modules, visit our website at croner-i.co.uk.